Uh, Kia ora koutou. We are really pleased today that we can host nearly 900, I think, registered for this webinar, which shows the extent of the interest in listening to the Minister and also being able to spend a little bit of time answering or posing some questions and listening to some of your answers, Nicola. You know, the sector really, community sector, the iwi sector, hapu sector really are interested in the future and your journey around social investment in the new agency. So yeah, no mai, haere mai to all the hapu, the whānau, the community sector that are on this webinar, tēnei rā. I'm Zoe Hook. I'm going to co-facilitate with Katie. I am the CEO of E Area Whānau Services. We are a small Ngāti Paoa health and social service iwi provider. And I'm also the co-chair of SPA, which is the National Social Service Provider Association. It's really good to be here, but without further ado, I think we need a karakia to open and also to acknowledge you, Minister, and your colleagues in the loss of Nikki Kay. And we are feeling for you. We absolutely know that she was a very influential person and a friend of yours and did some amazing mahi for Aotearoa. So now I'm going to open with karakia. E rangi e papa e te whānau atua, whakatungia a koutou manakitanga, kei roto e tēnei hui a mātou, haumie, hui e, tai ki e. I'm going to pass it on to Katie now to introduce herself. Kia ora, Katie.
Kia ora, Zoe. Ngā mihi nui ki a minita, ki a koutou. It's really awesome to be joining you all today. And Zoe and I will be pretending that we're literally just speaking to you, person in the corner of your office. It's not this scary hundreds of people. It's just you. We're just having a little chat. And how amazing to be joined, by Minister for Social Development today and to be able to open up a conversation direct with communities from the very smallest. There are many of you here today who are entirely volunteer run to those big social service provider organisations and everyone in between. And the level of interest really shows the willingness to engage, the importance of these spaces, and also some concerns that communities have around what this is, what it means, and what it's going to look like for them. So I'm Katie Bruce. I'm the Chief Executive of Hui E Community Aotearoa, and we provide spaces for kōrero. We're a peak body across the sector, and we bring groups together for collective action. One of those groups that you may or may not have heard of is the Community Constellation. So we are a newly formed group of over 25 community peak bodies and infrastructure organisations. We've come together because we know that we can be stronger together. We need to have some strategic conversations as a sector. And I want to really acknowledge all of those groups who have just been put up in the chat so you can see who they are, who have supported us today. We are currently sat in Aotearoa's office. Jane, the CE, is sitting opposite me here, supporting with the Q&As, as well as Michelle Kitney from Volunteering New Zealand and Community Research have provided the Zoom for today, and I've had to make them extend their subscription. So hugely grateful and this is what community is, right? It's all of us coming together to be able to do collective action. So I've read through the many hundreds of questions and comments that you shared when you registered for today. And I want to acknowledge the time that you've taken to be here, the work that you do, and also the realities that you've shared. And it's difficult to separate this conversation from those realities, from the challenging funding environment, from the funding cuts that many of you are experiencing, and the long-term pattern of over delivery and of supporting and walking alongside whānau. So this webinar format is limited in the type of engagement that we can have, but we really hope that it's just the start of being able to engage strategically in these sorts of conversations. We will not get through a fraction of the questions that you all have, but please know that I have read every single one of them, that we've collated them into some themes, and that we will be presenting them back to yourselves as well as to the Social Investment Agency and to the Minister as the next part of the engagement that we hope to have from here. The webinar is being recorded. We will share that back with you, and the closed captions are available if anyone would like to use those. So I'm just going to share really, really quickly that I'm just going to share my screen with you now about who we are. So, Tangata Whenua community and voluntary sector, we are enormous. There are 115,000 community organisations in Aotearoa. 5% of the country's workforce we make up, and over 1 million volunteer hours every week. Our superpower is our diversity. Switching to the next slide here. We have expertise, dedication, and most importantly, relationships. And that is absolutely how we do our work. Many of us, though, are working beyond capacity and have, been engaging with what has been experienced as a siloed government agencies in many respects, as well as walking alongside whānau who are dealing with structural inequities and a cost of living crisis. There are opportunities too. We've seen an outpouring of kotahitanga in the last couple of weeks. Whānau, hapu, iwi are working innovatively and creatively on their own solutions. And I want to thank Community Research for an upcoming summary of sector research over the last few years and for allowing me to share that with you today. So that's a little bit of an intro from me, but it's not me that you've come to hear. So I'm going to pass over to you, Zoe, to introduce us.
This is my time to introduce you, Minister. Again, thank you for your time, and we know you're a busy wahine, so we know that you are a mother of 4, the most important part of your mahi, to 4 beautiful children, busy, I'm sure they keep you. And you're also the current Deputy Leader of the National Party, Minister of Finance, Minister for the Public Service, Associate Minister of Climate Change, and of course, Minister of Social Investment. So yes, absolutely busy, and you've carved out some time for us. You have heard that we have a whole lot of partai that people have asked, but we certainly have grouped some themes for later on. But I'm going to give you the floor now. You're really the star. And I'm going to say, kōrero mai, Minister. Please do enlighten us with your vision for social investment and the agency that you lead. Kia ora.
Kia ora. O tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thank you, Zoe and Katie, for that introduction. Thank you for that karakia for our dear Nikki Kay. She was someone whose heart burned brightly with a desire to help others, and her life was a magnificent example of the positive impact we can have on others. I want to thank the Communities Constellation for hosting me online today. This is a really wonderful opportunity to engage ka nohi te ka nohi, sort of, via Zoom, with many of you who I know are doing great work around the country. And I'm accompanied by Andrew Costa, the new Chief Executive for the Social Investment Agency, who will be looking to engage with you over the coming months and years. So I understand that social investment is something that's a fairly new concept, and speaking honestly, it means different things to different people. And so it's, I think, completely to be expected that you will have a lot of questions about what it means for the community sector. And speaking bluntly, for some of you, it won't mean anything immediately. Many of you are doing social investment now, and you will continue to do it. For others, it might be an opportunity for more collaboration, for better understanding and articulating the impact that you have on people. For others, it might be an opportunity to work differently, and I hope better, with the government agencies with whom you engage. and for whom we have really high expectations, because it's our view that sometimes they get in the way of great work in communities rather than supporting it. Although every single person in those public agencies shares our heart for impacting our communities well, sometimes there are better ways of doing things. So let me acknowledge you, the incredible work you do to support, nurture and empower your communities. And I know that the group that I'm talking to is so diverse, from tiny little organisations to big ones, doing mahi in all sorts of parts of our society. And what I think you hold in common is that working at that grassroots level means you directly see the impact on those who need it most and understand what is needed to get best results for our people. And I'd like
Minister, I'm sorry to interrupt there. We're getting some feedback on the volume of your voice, and I'm just wondering if you could, I know we've looked at this issue before we started, and maybe you could just raise your voice for our participants. Kia ora.
Okay, hey, I'm so sorry. I don't know why this isn't working, but it is going to be something that I work on. Hopefully by yelling at you, it's a bit better. And if you don't like being yelled at, I'm sorry, we all know why it's happening. I apologize. But social investment, what is it? It's about empowering communities and providers with data about who you're helping and how you're helping them, with tools, with evidence to understand and meet people's needs, to drive earlier and more effective investment in social outcomes. And at our recent social investment Hui, which we held a couple of weeks ago, I shared some views on this. My speech is on the Beehive website for those of you who need some late night reading. But at that Hui, I told the story of Jack. I asked people to imagine him, a 22-year-old who just committed his third offence, who was looking at a jail term, but who prior to that offence had had numerous interactions with the government system throughout his life, with police, with oranga tamariki, with alternative education, with many well-meaning people seeking to impact him, but all sharing a frustration that they were able to deal with some of the problem, but not all of it, that there were limitations on what they could do. And what I see in those examples of someone like Jack is an example of a human being who was born with boundless potential. He was born with the ability to contribute positively to his family, his community, his country, but instead, the path that he's on is one of social harm and pain and cost. And so that's actually what I think we all need and want to change. So social investment is about acknowledging that despite the good efforts of many and successive governments, we still don't have a system that enables us to use our resources in the best way to enable that change. So it's about asking ourselves, how can we intervene earlier and have more impact? How can we empower non-government organisations who are closest to our communities to innovate, to drive change? How can we make better use of the incredible data we have to improve outcomes for people? So we know that increasing investment in itself hasn't always led to better outcomes that we expect. Now, of course, that is necessary to increase investment, but it's not sufficient. We also have to ask ourselves where the money is going and is it going in the right places? Because people have complex needs and some public services are not effectively meeting those needs. And I think we all share concern for issues such as rising inequality, welfare dependency, poor educational attendance and achievement, or health outcomes, victimisation, offending behaviours. And we know that children growing up in those circumstances still have potential that with earlier and quality support, we can help improve their lives and their outcomes. So a social investment approach is about doing that better. So data, it gives us a good sense of where to direct the scarce resources of government, because no government, unfortunately, ever has enough for all of the need that we see. And the obligation we face is to make choices about where we put the resources that we have and that we are custodians of on behalf of taxpayers and those who work hard. So we know that data, I want to be clear, does not tell us everything about what's happening in communities. Absolutely not. That is where you come in, because we want to see more devolution of decision making to enable communities more clarity about what works for who, because what works for one person or whānau might not work for another. And we want to give you more space for innovation. So in accountant speak, this is where we talk about shifting from outputs, how many meetings you had, how many people you visited, instead thinking about outcomes. Were the lives of those people improved by the choices and the activity that we took? And so that means asking ourselves the right questions. A social investment approach says, first, what are the outcomes we want to achieve? It's a different question from what government often asks itself, which is, what can we give people? And it's actually a question that leads to different outcomes because it's a more empowering question. It's what is the result we want for people, not what do we give them. Second, who needs help? Which sounds simple, but often the question is instead, how should we distribute the services we already have? And instead saying, let's put the needs of the people who need help most ahead of the needs of organisations and government agencies who provide services. What's simple for them to do, the way they've always done it, is less important than serving the real need. Third question, social investment invites us to ask, what services should be prioritised? Not what shall we add to the service mix, because that means identifying instead what's working and, just as importantly, what's not working, because we all have to be in this together and acknowledge that some of what we try doesn't work. That's what innovation and experimentation is about. Fourth, how do we enable providers to achieve the outcomes we want? Not, as I think government agencies sometimes think, how do we manage providers so they do what we want, but instead, how do we empower them to achieve the outcomes we want to see? And final question, how will we know if what we are doing is working? And that's a question that is not asked often enough, and I think the failure to do so is at the root of too much inefficiency in our social system. So drawing on evidence, being clear about the answers to these questions gives us the best chance of changing lives. So I just want to be clear at this juncture. For me, it's not about elaborate evaluations and literature reviews, okay? It is about real-time insights into what's working, what's not working, and what to do next to get the result that matters for the people we serve. We should be informed by the insights of the literature and the science, but we should always hold ourselves accountable to what's happening on the ground. And ultimately, all of this is about creating more success stories and fewer jacks. And I think if we want fewer jacks, we have to all ask ourselves to think differently. So what are we doing from government? In July this year, we established the Social Investment Agency. It's a central agency, so it sits at the heart of government. Its job is to lead, build, demonstrate a social investment approach. Because I want to see systems change across the public service, so not just in the Ministry of Social Development or in Health NZ or in the police and Oranga Tamariki, but across government. And so that requires a central agency. And in the first few months, the SIA has focused on getting some fundamentals in place. This is a journey. It is not all going to be achieved in year one or term one. So we've been focused on establishing the institutional arrangements needed to support social investment, including the agency getting the people it needs. And the recruitment of Andrew is a wonderful step there, someone who knows our communities really well. Establishing a social investment board, which was announced a couple of weeks ago. Again, that's on the Beehive website. We strove to represent a diverse range of perspectives, both politically, but also in terms of geographically, in terms of the different grassroots communities that those people have worked with. We've been leading significant work to develop outcomes-based social investment contracts. So this is a new function for the agency about how we contract better. We get huge feedback about how those of you who have government contracts can find that process disempowering, difficult, administratively burdensome, and not sufficiently focused on the needs of the people you serve. So I'm really ambitious for the Social Investment Agency to drive work to improve that for providers across government. And I realise that that will take time, but we're getting started, and changing the way that social services are commissioned will be a critical component of getting social investment underway. We've also been developing an initial set of guidance and standards for government departments so that they can implement social investment, including some value and impact measurement standards. And we've been considering our own data infrastructure alongside Stats NZ that we need to be able to support social investment. So the agency is also continuing its role as being experts in analytics at looking at what the data tells us. And I'm looking forward to it providing you in the sector with more data and insights and tools to understand and know your communities and the context in which you're working. I've also asked the agency to establish and manage a social investment fund that will directly commission outcomes for vulnerable New Zealanders, and do that by working with community, non-government organisations, iwi providers, post-settlement entities, ahu whenua organisations and others. The fund will be a testing ground for innovation. It'll start small. So I don't want anyone to be dreaming that the fund will be the thing that solves all of the funding challenges I know you face. It will start small, but the ambition is to build it over time, from something small and targeted to something that becomes a vehicle for empowering new approaches. And my ambition is that eventually it will be an effective vehicle, not just for government investment in changing people's lives, but also as a home for funding from philanthropists, investors, all of those people you and I know in the community who want to deploy their money in service of social good, but want to make sure they have the most impact when they do that. So what does it all mean for the community sector? First of all, I just want to say really upfront, I recognise government does not have all the answers, and we need to work with you to get the best outcomes. I also recognise that a lot of the work we have underway is focused in the first instance on the Social Investment Agency working with public sector agencies. We kind of have to do our own housework first before we're ready to do a lot of the external facing work. But I recognise that grassroots providers like you are going to have an increasingly important role. And I know that social investment, as I said, means different things to you. And we're just starting our engagement, and we need to keep that going. And we're really interested in keeping that going. We meet with your peak bodies regularly, and we want to keep doing that. So I also just want to finish by cleaning up a little myth. Social investment does not mean that you have to get an impact lab report. You will never see that as a requirement. I do expect that you understand and ask yourself question about the impact you are having, but there will be different ways of approaching that appropriate to the resources and scale of your organisation. So I want to clean that up at the beginning and leave us to your questions.
Papai, thank you for that, Nicola. We really appreciate you've actually answered some of the part-time minister that were the themes that came through from the sector. We are going to move on to the question and answer session now. And just noting too that we are stretched for time, May. This is a short, but also there's going to be more to come, no doubt, Minister. You're going to get involved with communities, spend more time with communities, hapu iwi, to engage them in this kōrero like you've just talked about. You said that we are the solution. You can't do it without us. So that's really good to hear. And one of the main themes, I'm going to start with the first one, if that's okay, is you did touch on it, which is how will you ensure that more investment reaches local and specialist grassroots, iwi and hapu organisations who have the relationships with whānau and communities to deliver impact alongside them? However, they might not have the resources or the ability, because some of these smaller organizations are the innovative ones. They might not have the time, and I'm not just talking about Pūtea, but the time or financial resources to paint the story of their impact. How will they be able to engage and work with you, because they are doing great things, to really change that story of Jack, because they definitely know how to have better outcomes for our whānau and people like Jack, who often we're related to, who often are part of our whānau, and that we have seen at our services over years. Over to you to answer that one.
So the way I think of this is that sometimes we make this really complicated. We think about what are all the different appropriations the government has, all of the different funding modules it has, what are all of the rosters of service providers in each sector, what are the different initiatives. I think we should start by saying, for each community that we wish to serve, who are the individuals and whānau we are most concerned about? This is through a social investment lens. Who is working effectively with them now, and who is best placed to have an impact on them? So what that demands of us as government is being much more joined up in the way we think about those families and individuals. At the moment, we think sometimes through an education lens, sometimes through a health lens, sometimes through an OT lens. But challenging ourselves to think much more holistically about that whānau as a whole, that family as a whole, and to join up the way that we commission services to achieve that. I've seen some really good examples in communities where you have a collective or an umbrella that is the contract holding entity, but it works with other smaller organisations underneath it. And I think there's something to be said for that approach, which says, if we have a lead delivery entity, how are we holding it accountable for working effectively at that grassroots level in its own community? So I think it starts with engaging with those who've been demonstrated to have the most positive impact for their community. And that's where this evidence piece does matter, because it's about being able to communicate that. But what I want to achieve with the agency is that we are able to create tools and better ways of everyone at every level understanding that, seeing that, collectively agreeing as a community what it is they want to see and how they're going to measure it.
Papai, and that's definitely another theme. Will there be support or resourcing for capacity building in regards to smaller organisations or the community sectors, hapu iwi that haven't settled, that to build their capacity in the area of measuring the impacts? That was just a rolling off some of the kōrero that you just talked to. Yeah,
so I think about this differently, because if I'm going to put an extra dollar into an initiative, I want it to, as much of that dollar, to be impacting Jack rather than anyone else. So that's my focus. So the question then becomes, how do we work with community groups to together understand how we are measuring impact? So I think that's about government sometimes being a better partner, which is saying, here's the data we have about the people you work with. We own it, and sharing it with you, and then together talking about what would a positive change look like? What would the early indicators of that be? What would we think we might see in the feedback or the data? Do we have an agreed view of that? What is our hypothesis about what success would look like next quarter, next year, 3 years from now, 10 years from now? And let's agree a way that we can use the data and the evidence we have to measure that. So it's much more about sitting down together, if government's working with you, to ask you about what it is you need in order to measure and articulate that impact.
Thank you. And I think it's really interesting, because what we're talking about here often are those really grassroots organisations and hapu who are the ones, they're the ones that know Jack and his whānau, if we're going to keep going with Jack. And and really that I'm, interested to hear about how Jack and his whānau can be, included. And, it's just last week at the social investment hui that you held with 100 of us, I think, there was Materoa Ma said, what matters to whānau is what's important rather than what is the matter with them. So I'm interested, I guess, in how it is that those, whānau might be identified. Is this something that government are going to look at where they want to target their money, or is there going to be, real investment in those organisations and those groups and those hapu who know their communities and work alongside them already?
Yeah, well, look, I just start by that I have a very sort of philosophical view in the first instance that the person closest to the whānau will always understand them better than even the most passionate, smart, hardworking public servant here in Wellington, because that part of community context is important. So a large thing that drives me with social investment is how do we better connect the decisions we make here in Wellington to those people who are closest to the challenges we're all striving to solve. So that's the starting place. The second thing that I just respond to is, look, I'm a big believer in strength-based approaches, instead of starting from a kind of a deficit mentality, saying what are the things in this whānau that are great, that makes sense. But when it comes to targeting my resources, basically what I am looking for is I want to have an impact on those children and families who we know are most likely to be at risk of not optimizing their human potential, and whose lives are going to, instead of taking the path of progress, will take a downhill path. And there are a range of ways that we can measure that. I think we can all agree that we don't want people in prison. I think we can agree that we don't want people unemployed for long periods of time, that we don't want people who lack for the resources they need to raise their families, that we want kids who are well educated and not missing out on school, not missing out on immunisation and important health services, that aren't waiting too long for care. So the way we want to approach it is to use those data points that all of the analytics can tell us are the indicators that a family or a child are particularly at risk of a particularly difficult life.
Okay, thank you for that, kōrero, Minister. I know that it is a journey. You talked about it, and certainly, year 1 or 2 is about getting it right internally, but we, again, encourage you to stay connected with us, because we want to be part of the solution, and we do have solutions, and we want to see better outcomes, absolutely. We have been a little bit, many of us, surprised or concerned about the last mental health RFP that came out, where we had to have co-investment and we had to have the social impact report. So just flagging that, yes, thank you, Minister, for saying that we won't need that, but being clear about that in the future, and how we, even without an expensive impact report, how we do that would be really appreciated in regards to that pathway, being clear about that pathway. I think we're going to move on to next question.
We are going to move on. I think, one of the themes that came through really strongly, you've talked about inequities already today, Minister. One of the things that came through really strongly from the participants here today when they registered is, our concerns about the current levels of inequity, and wanting to make sure that the approaches taken will reduce and certainly not exacerbate those. And of course, that starts with equity of access to resources, valuing Māori-led solutions. We had the absolute highlight of the hui that you held a couple of weeks ago was hearing from iwi chairs about their social investment roadmap that they are just absolutely a million miles ahead on and running with. And I guess, so I'm interested in how this approach will value, create space and resources for mana motuheke, and also really the question is, how will Te Tiriti responsibilities be reflected in the social investment approach?
Well, look, as I think you will have seen at the Hui, I share that audacious vision that says, imagine a world in which instead of government agencies determining where the resources go in a community, communities themselves are deciding that. And when we think through that lens, the simple and sad and awful fact is that Māori are disproportionately represented in the social statistics of the people that I want social investment to have in its mind's eye. So that necessarily means that iwi organisations, hapu organisations that are led by Māori, that have Māori kaupapa, that are for Māori, but also for others, by the way, are going to play a really important role. You know, I think of Ngāti Toa here in Wellington, and yes, they are motivated by a desire to help Ngāti Toa, but actually they've developed social services that have an impact on a much broader range of New Zealanders in their community because they know their community well. You know, when I think of Te Tiriti and social investment, you know, it's that Article 2 concept of rangatiratanga. How can we empower people to take control of these things and do it better? Because government does deploy significant resources, and I think we can all acknowledge that we can deploy them better, and working closely with communities will allow us to do that. So, look, I think that this is a really exciting opportunity to work better and differently with iwi Māori.
Right. It's really great to hear that, you know, that acknowledgement and that space for tino rangatiratanga, which would be really exciting to see reflected through the social investment agencies' approaches to engagement and resource and setting up the fund and thinking about how you influence across. So I know that's a really big part of the agency's role, is to influence as a central agency across, you know, the allocation of resourcing of all of the government agencies. Kia ora.
Yeah, and look, I just want to acknowledge the point you made around the iwi chairs and the work that they've already done. You know, they're already thinking about, and it's worth you engaging with if you want to go onto their website or speak with them directly. They're already thinking about what's the roadmap of preparing for social investment look like for an organisation on the ground. And they've done some great work there. And so, you know, I think that's a very important part of how we roll this out.
Papa, yes, and Willie is certainly a personality, isn't he? On stage.
He's
Yes.
God loves a trier. He's one of those people who's a go-getter.
Absolutely. And you're right. My iwi Ngāti Pawa sit on the iwi chairs, and certainly the resources and the tools that they're developing or have already developed are very helpful in regards to the journey or the next steps. And we want that for everybody in the community. Doing the hard yards, we want clear pathways. So whatever you can offer and support us to do that would be greatly appreciated, Minister. Now, I think we're going to move on to the next partai. And this really has sort of been touched on already, but would love to hear more from you, Minister. You talked about not needing expensive impact reports, but we are interested how you anticipate working with communities, whānau, hapu iwi, to determine what measurements will be. Because as you know, some are, and this links into Tiriti as well, some of the measurements we want for our whānau, we want for our hapu and iwi, may not be the measurements that government's considering. So how will you determine what measurements will be? How will you involve our whānau, our hapu, our iwi in that? And also, what other forms of evaluation and impact measurement would you accept in regards to trying to participate and engage with a social investment agency? There's a lot in there. Hopefully you can pull some stuff out.
Yeah, look, well, the first thing I'll say, because I want to be really clear, but for many of the people on this call, there's not going to be a change in the next little while. You're going to keep doing what you do, and I'm not getting in your way. I'm not changing things for you. You're going to keep driving your thing forward. Perhaps those for whom this starts to become the most meaningful is those who already engage significantly with government. So there will be those on this call who already have significant contracts with government. And those of you who have those contracts with government, I would love to meet someone who has a contract with government who says it's absolutely perfect, because I haven't met them yet. I think most of you would say there are challenges with the way that we contract with government. So what I'm wanting to do is bring together your desire for a better process of how you engage with government and what those contracts look like, with my desire to get a clearer picture of the genuine impact we are having for the investments we make, and better incentivizing the innovation and the joined up thinking that will have the more profound impact on the individuals and families we want to serve. So I see it as a coming together. How can we work with you to reduce some of the admin and the bureaucracy and the clutter and the uncertainty, while also being able to give ourselves more conviction that by taking that approach, we're getting more impact for the people that we each want to serve. So as I say, that for me is about, at the beginning, having clarity about what it is that we are funding you for. Really at its heart, what is the outcome for the people that we are serving? Who is it you're serving? And what is our agreed way of how we might measure that? So look, I'd just be upfront. This is going to be a process that we learn together over these next few years. It will start small with just literally fewer than half a dozen prototype contracts. But my vision is that we build that from there so that we become a better partner for communities in the way that we fund social services, particularly for our most vulnerable.
Okay. I am seeing, you might not be able to see them, everyone, but we are getting quite a few pārtai directly to us in the question and answer section of our webinar. I just want to remind everyone that we may not be able to ask them all, but we will be gathering your kōrero, and we will be packaging it for the rest of the sector and also for the minister, so that she can review them and maybe get stimulated or some ideas, because there's some great solutions in there and ideas too that might contribute to the journey that the Social Impact Agency is about to, or are in the middle of embarking on.
I was just going to add as well that, you know, something that we've been reflecting on a bit is just the slipperiness sometimes of social impact. So, you know, you can talking about social impact to us as a sector, as a rōpū, is something that is not new. We talk about it all the time. It's why we do what we do. And what's really interesting is that the difference between, you know, being able to capture the slipperiness, because quite often, you know, you can have social impact without being able to measure it. You can't measure impact in the way within a particular framework unless you have the tools and the resources to do so. So I think for us, when we're, you know, thinking about how that is done, it needs to be fit for purpose for, you know, for some of the big organizations, big initiatives, compared with, you know, some of those small grassroots volunteer powered groups. So really looking forward to engaging more with SIA as that stuff is developed, and the opportunities for that to come from within community, you know, inspiring communities, for example, are already working on that.
Yeah, look, I just acknowledge that it is slippery, because it does mean different things to different people. But I try not to worry too much about that. whenever I'm focusing on it, I come back to Jack. And what Jack's story tells us is that despite the heart and effort of so many, and despite the resources, we're still not getting the impact we want. So this is about saying, how can we have a more positive impact for more people? How can we do things differently and better? And with that spirit in mind, it's about challenging us to do it better. And that does, in my mind, start with government thinking in a more focused way about how we look after Jack.
And so I'm just going to jump in on
Yeah,
oh, you go.
Yes. I just saw a question pop up, and I'm gonna ask you because it is something that I've been considering too, and I know others have been too. There is some decisions that may have been made in regards to some toe in the sand around some social investment priorities. Like I'm thinking about the first 2,000 days. And this is across government. Can you talk a little bit? And that was a question that popped up. Just could you talk a bit about that, Minister? Because some of that is intergenerational in nature, and actually the issue with Jack is that it's an intergenerational impact that we see demonstrated in Jack now. So could you, just talk to some of your priorities across government?
What are the examples that you're thinking of?
First 2,000 days, we've had a lot of kōrero around first 2,000 days, and the impact that can have if we focus some of our attention and investment on the first 2,000 days of our babies' lives. Just some of those messages that we're hearing. Have you got any thinking around that to help guide the sector on your thinking?
Yeah, well, look, at the heart of the child and youth development strategy is the idea that how we deploy our resources in those first 2,000 days is critical. So we accept the case that what we do for tamariki during that phase in life sets foundations for later. One of the things I think is important is that there's no such thing as an individual baby. Every baby exists in a family and a community. And so we do need to think about what are the things that better equip a family or a community to support a child in the first 2,000 days. And I worry sometimes that we don't do a good enough job as government of getting our resources to the people who most need our help, because sometimes the people who most need our help are the least likely to engage with government because they don't trust government. They might be the mum who never gets a lead maternity carer. She just turns up at the delivery suite. It might actually be the family who didn't apply for the childcare subsidy. It might be the family who actually didn't get a plunket nurse visiting them. So part of the gap I think we can bridge in the first 2,000 days is thinking about how, through a real social investment lens, would we make sure that resources are truly reaching the whānau who have the most challenge. And again, it comes back to this question of who in the community knows them, who is trusted by them, who are the people who they will open the door to. And that's where I'm very humble that is unlikely to be a government agency. So it's how do we get resources to the people who will be trusted to help that family when it matters most.
Yes. We totally that. Certainly our communities, our hapu, we know our communities well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's really interesting to think about and came through in some of the comments is, the things that are often the easiest to measure aren't necessarily the things that are going to make the difference. So, it might be that there's a specific program by which, delivers an intended specific outcome, but actually that whānau are also involved in many, many other supports or that it's a holistic approach that's going to make the difference, which is harder both to measure but likely to have a bigger impact. So I think it's those sorts of things that through the experience of the sector working alongside whānau know works, but also finding the right ways to measure that and finding the right then funding frameworks for that to work will be interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. That is part of the challenge and the complexity. I talk about lead indicators. So we know what we want. We want Jack at 22 not to be violently offending and on a path to prison, but that's at 22. So what we're trying to work out is, how will we know at 2 and at 4 years old and at 5 years old and at 10 years old that we're doing a better job for Jack? What are the indicators of that? And some of these are things that we can measure. Is he attending school each day? Has he had his immunizations? Has his family been free from violence such that the police haven't been visiting? There are indicators, but the point that you're making, I think, is those who are closest to Jack's whānau will have an idea of what are the things that will support that family, so that over time you'll see those secondary impacts occurring, the measurable bits.
Yeah, and
so they'll look for the strengths and the things in the family that they think you might not think this is the thing, but we know we get that right, these things down the track will get right. And that's what I'm talking about with these upfront conversations. Let's talk together about what we think are the indicators of success and find a shared view on that.
We're going to move now to there have been some concerns shared with us, particularly around overcapacity demand and funding. So I just really want to ask you that whether you have any concerns, whether you share those concerns that we have around how we address current growing needs with what seems like a reduction in funding for prevention and community supports, and how do those things go hand in hand, and how can you deliver on social investment in that environment?
Yeah, well, look, it's challenging, right? Because financially, we are as a country in a challenging position. In our response to COVID, we built up a lot of debt. We've got $118 billion more of debt now than we did a few years ago. That comes with a cost. So we're now spending $9 billion a year just on the interest costs of that debt. Used to only be a couple of billion. Our books are out of balance. We're trying to get things financially on a more sustainable path, and that is challenging for everyone. And I'm always conscious that in pursuing that path of let's get things into balance so we're not burdening our kids with so much debt that it's a problem, that requires of us to focus the resources we do have on the frontline services that have the biggest impact. So every budget I deliver will have more funding for health. It will have more funding for education. It will have more funding for law and order. Those things are bottom lines for me. But what I'm trying to do with social investment is better demonstrate that there is very big outsized value in funding early intervention that works. Not just for people, is there that impact, but actually economically, if we intervene earlier, we save ourselves a heck of a lot of costs down the line. And so part of what social investment is about is getting the data and the evidence that proves that, so that I can put that in my budgets, so I can put in my budgets, yes, we're putting this extra money here, but look how much it's going to save us over here. And so that's the vision I'm working towards. And, essentially we spend a huge amount on ambulances at the bottom of the cliff currently. And if we could spend a bit more on fences, we'd all be better off. I think we intuitively get that, but it's how do we get our data and our evidence and the way that we fund and commission services to better reflect that impetus.
Yeah, with reflecting back that concern that people have around how preventative services have faced funding cuts, and therefore the discussion about one at the same time as the other is a difficult one for people to hold both of those things at the same time, and difficult to walk alongside whānau who have those needs where the funding is not there currently. And also just the diversity, just acknowledging that we're talking quite a bit here around the social service side of things and contracting with government, whereas actually the majority of our sector, all across everything from sports to culture to arts and all of those things, actually collectively make us who we are and give us life as a whole community. sector.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And as I say, let me be clear, what we're doing in the Social Investment Agency won't impact all of you immediately, and you will just keep doing incredible work. And I know that to be true, and I don't take that for granted. And I don't by any means think that the only work that matters is the work that we're measuring in the agency. That's just simply not the case. This is about how we can do a better job of the things that government does do, and incrementally improve that over time.
Our time is ticking on. See, good corridor goes quickly. It's 1:27, and we do have one last question for you, Minister. And hopefully, I'm sure, because you are quite a gifted speaker. I know you did debating once upon a time in your life too, didn't you? So here you go. Are you ready?
I meet my husband.
Yep, partnership. Right. What is your aspiration for social investment in 2030? And try and do it in 4 words.
Better impact for those who need us most.
Papa, beautiful.
We'll take the extras.
Yeah, there was a few extras, but yeah, nice summary. Thank you. And with that, have you got any final words, Kate?
Yeah, I think that I just really want to acknowledge, you taking the time, Minister, and particularly today, to be with us and for being up for an open discussion and hopefully the start of an engagement. As you can see, there's huge interest from us in communities to do that engagement. There's definitely, there are some challenges on the table around what that looks like for us and in the context in which we're working, and we're seeing Jack and we're seeing his whānau and we're seeing how hard it is to support him, particularly in navigating the state systems and the inequities in which he's faced for generations, which are going to need a long-term aspirational approach. And so we're hearing your optimism, we're hearing your real appetite for change and your openness to listen and engage. So I really appreciate that, as well as all of you who have come along to listen, who took the time to send in all of those fantastic comments and questions. And as I say, we'll be reflecting that back, sending out the recording, and continue to engage. And please get in touch, particularly if you think you should be part of this community constellation. It's just been me on my lonesome going around. So all of those peak bodies, infrastructure support organisations, please get in touch. katie@huie.org.nz. I would love to have a conversation with you. Kia ora koutou.
And with that, and just a reminder, we will collate all this information, all the questions, and pass them over to the Minister and to the rest of the sector. I'm going to close with karakia, and you can get on with your day, Minister, and the sector can get on with their day. We know you've got lots on. And again, yes, moi mai rā to our beloved Nikki Kay. So, karakia tātou. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ai o te aroha, me te marutau, ti hei, mauri ora. Kia pai tō rā koutou.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I look forward to continuing to engage. And thank you all for your work and your heart and your passion for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. You too.